The courtroom was a battlefield, and Jordan Hayes was the unlikeliest of warriors. At just 16 years old, he sat in the defendant's chair, his cheap suit hanging loosely on his thin frame. His sharp blue eyes, however, burned with a fire that belied his age. The room was packed with spectators, their hushed whispers filling the air like the hum of a storm about to break. Judge Preston, a grizzled man with a face like carved stone, slammed his gavel against the bench. The sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the room. "Kid," the judge barked, his voice dripping with disdain, "you must be out of your mind. What are you even doing here? This is a court of law, not a school talent show." Laughter rippled through the courtroom, harsh and mocking. The prosecutor, a smug man in a tailored suit, chuckled under his breath. Jordan didn't flinch. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and spoke in a calm, unwavering voice. "Your Honor, I have read every statute relevant to this case. I assure you, I know what I'm doing." The room fell silent. Judge Preston leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a headache. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Where are this kid's parents? Who let him play dress-up in my courtroom?" Jordan's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "I don't have parents." The judge froze. The laughter died instantly, replaced by an uncomfortable shifting in the seats. For the first time, there was no mockery, no condescension, just stunned silence. Before the judge could respond, the prosecutor stood up, flipping through a thick file with an exaggerated sigh. "Fine," he said, smirking. "Let's humor him. Let's watch the child embarrass himself." He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I proceed with my opening statement?" The judge waved his hand impatiently. "By all means." The prosecutor smirked at Jordan. "This will be over in 5 minutes," he whispered. Jordan said nothing. His hands, steady and strong, gripped a single sheet of paper. He was ready, and no one in that courtroom had any idea what was about to happen next. The cold wind howled through the streets, biting at Jordan's face as he walked alone. His backpack, heavy with law books, was slung over one shoulder. At 16, Jordan had just crossed the threshold into adulthood, but he felt much older. Life had forced him to grow up fast. He lived in a tiny one-room apartment in the roughest part of town. No parents, no family, just him and his books. While other kids played video games or went to parties, Jordan spent his nights studying court cases and memorizing legal codes. It wasn't a hobby, it was survival. He knew that one day, he would need to fight. That day came sooner than he expected. Jordan worked part-time at a small diner, washing dishes to pay for food and rent. It wasn't much, but it kept him alive. One evening, as he walked home, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Two police officers were pushing an old man against the wall. The man, frail and trembling, begged for mercy. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't do anything." Jordan recognized him instantly. It was Mr. Wilkins, the kind old man who always gave him free coffee at the diner. One of the officers smirked. "We got a witness saying you stole from the corner store." "I didn't," Mr. Wilkins protested, his voice desperate. The other officer grabbed him roughly. "Save it for the judge." Jordan's fists clenched. He knew Mr. Wilkins. The man barely had enough money for rent, let alone to steal something. This was wrong. "Wait." Jordan stepped forward, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at his chest. "He didn't do it." The officers turned to him, their expressions a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Kid," one of them said, "stay out of this." Jordan swallowed his fear. "You don't have proof." "We have a witness," the officer repeated, his tone irritated. Jordan narrowed his eyes. "What kind of witness?" The officers exchanged a look, and Jordan knew instantly that they were bluffing. There was no witness, just a convenient excuse to harass an old man. "Listen, kid," the second officer said. "You want to play lawyer? Go do it somewhere else." But Jordan wasn't going anywhere. "If you arrest him without real evidence," he said slowly, "that's an unlawful arrest. You know that, right?" Silence. The first officer laughed dryly. "Where'd you learn that?" "Some TV show." Jordan's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "No. From the legal code. Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. Arresting someone without probable cause is a violation of their Fourth Amendment rights. If you take him in without solid proof, that's a civil rights violation. And guess what? That means he can sue you." The officers stared at him, their expressions shifting from amusement to uncertainty. Jordan pulled out his phone. "I can pull up the case law right now," he said. "Want me to quote it for you?" More silence. Then, slowly, the officer let go of Mr. Wilkins. "Just stay out of trouble, old man," he muttered. The other officer shot Jordan a glare before they walked off. Jordan turned to Mr. Wilkins. "Are you okay?" The old man's hands were shaking. How did you do that?" Jordan shrugged. "I read a lot." Mr. Wilkins gripped Jordan's arm, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You have a gift, son." Jordan didn't answer. He wasn't thinking about gifts. He was thinking about something bigger. If he could stop one injustice, why not more? That night, he made a decision. He was going to do something crazy, that he was going to defend himself in court. The prosecutor smirked as he adjusted his tie. "Your Honor, this is a simple case. The defendant is an unqualified child trying to play lawyer." He turned toward Jordan, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's be real, kid. Do you even know what a motion to dismiss is?" Jordan tilted his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Do you?" The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor's smirk faltered. Jordan stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Because if you did, you'd realize your entire case is built on hearsay. No direct evidence. No credible witnesses, and definitely no legal standing." The judge blinked. The prosecutor's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Jordan slid a piece of paper across the table. "Since you won't file the motion to dismiss," he said, "I will." Silence. Then the judge's face turned red. "Kid, Your Honor," Jordan interrupted, his voice steady. "You said I didn't belong in this courtroom." He straightened his tie. "I think I just proved otherwise." The entire courtroom was staring now. Judge Preston looked at the document in his hands, his fingers tightening around the edges. His eyes flickered with something Jordan had never seen before. Was it uncertainty? The courtroom was dead silent. Then the judge slammed his gavel. "Enough of this nonsense. You're not an attorney, and this case is not a game. I am putting an end to this right now." Jordan smiled. Because he knew something the judge didn't. This was far from over. The victory in the courtroom was supposed to feel like a triumph. But for Jordan Hayes, it was just the beginning. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the cold night air bit at his face, a stark contrast to the heat of the battle he'd just fought. The city lights flickered in the distance, but Jordan's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. He was right. 2 days later, Jordan was sitting in his tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of law books and legal notes, when a knock echoed at his door. He frowned. No one ever visited him. Cautiously, he opened the door to find a man in a sleek black suit standing there, his expression unreadable. "Jordan Hayes?" the man asked, his voice smooth but cold. "Yeah," Jordan replied, his guard up. "Mr. Robert Langston would like to meet you." Jordan's stomach dropped. Robert Langston. The name was legendary in legal circles, a billionaire attorney with a reputation for winning impossible cases. But Jordan had also heard whispers about Langston's darker side, the cases he'd rigged, the people he'd destroyed. "Why?" Jordan asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He's impressed by your performance in court. He'd like to offer you an opportunity." Jordan hesitated. This was dangerous. He knew it. But he also knew that turning down Langston could be even more dangerous. "Fine," he said. "I'll meet him." That evening, Jordan found himself at the Royce Hotel, one of the most luxurious places in the city. The chandeliers dripped with gold, and the air smelled like money. Seated at the best table in the room was Robert Langston himself. Langston was everything Jordan had imagined. Tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He smiled as Jordan approached, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Jordan Hayes," Langston said, his voice smooth and confident. "I've been looking forward to this." Jordan sat down, his expression neutral. "You wanted to see me?" Langston chuckled, swirling a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Straight to the point. I like that." He leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You're a prodigy, Jordan. What you did in that courtroom, no formal training, no law degree, and you still tore that prosecutor apart. That was legendary." Jordan didn't respond. He knew flattery when he heard it. Langston's smile widened. "I want you to join my firm. You'd be working on high-profile cases, making a name for yourself. The kind of opportunities most lawyers dream of." Jordan's mind raced. This was a once-in-a-lifetime offer, but something about it felt off. Langston wasn't just offering him a job. He was offering him power. And power like that always came with a price. Why me? Jordan asked, his voice calm. Langston leaned back, studying him. Because you're different. You don't just memorize laws, you understand them. You're the kind of talent that only comes around once in a generation. Jordan hesitated. I'm 16. Langston waved a hand dismissively. Age is just a number. What matters is what you can do. And you, Jordan, can do a lot. Jordan's gut told him to walk away, but he needed to know more. What's the catch? Langston's smirk didn't waver. None, he said. Unless you consider power a catch. Jordan met his gaze. Langston wasn't just offering him a job. He was offering him a seat at the table where real decisions were made. It was tempting, but Jordan knew better. Thanks, he said, standing up. But I'll pass. Langston's smile flickered for the first time. Think carefully, Jordan. Opportunities like this don't come twice. Jordan nodded. I have. As he walked out of the hotel, he could feel Langston's eyes on his back. The game had just begun. The next morning, Jordan received a package at his apartment. It was a sleek black envelope with no return address. Inside was a flash drive. Jordan's stomach twisted as he plugged it into his laptop. A single video file popped up on the screen. He clicked it, and his blood ran cold. The video showed Judge Preston, younger but unmistakable, standing in a hotel hallway. He knocked on a door, and Robert Langston answered. The two men spoke briefly, and then Langston handed Preston a thick envelope. Money. Bribery. The video cut to black. Jordan sat frozen, his mind racing. Judge Preston had warned him about Langston, but this video told a different story. Preston wasn't just a concerned mentor. He was involved. And now Langston was using this to send a message. We own him. And if you say no, we'll own you too. Jordan didn't wait. He grabbed his phone and called Judge Preston. The line rang twice before Preston answered, his voice groggy. It's late, Preston said. What's wrong? Jordan took a deep breath. We need to talk. Preston sighed. Jordan, I told you to stay away from Langston. Yeah, well, Jordan said, his voice tight. He just sent me a little gift. Silence. Then Preston's voice turned sharp. What kind of gift? Jordan didn't answer. Instead, he sent the video file to Preston's phone. A few seconds passed, and then Preston cursed under his breath. Where did you get this? Preston asked, his voice low and urgent. Doesn't matter, Jordan said. What matters is why he sent it to me. Preston exhaled heavily. Jordan, listen to me. This is bad. You need to lay low. Do not get involved with Langston. Jordan's fists clenched. It's too late for that. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, I never wanted you caught up in this. Jordan's heart pounded. Then tell me the truth. Why were you taking money from Langston? Another long silence. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I owed him a favor. A big one. And when Langston gives you something, you pay for it. Jordan's stomach twisted. So he owns you. Preston didn't answer, but the silence said everything. Jordan closed his eyes. This was worse than he thought. If Langston had control over Judge Preston, then there was no telling how deep this went. And Jordan was right in the middle of it. Jordan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the flash drive. He knew what he had to do. Langston wasn't just a powerful attorney. He was a criminal. And Jordan couldn't let him win. But taking on Langston meant stepping into a world of danger, where the rules didn't matter and the stakes were life and death. Jordan knew the risks, but he also knew he didn't have a choice. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Marissa Blake. A voice answered. Jordan took a deep breath. I need your help. Jordan Hayes sat in Marissa Blake's small, cluttered office, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Marissa, a defense attorney with a reputation for taking on impossible cases, leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying him with sharp eyes. So she said, her voice calm but laced with skepticism, you're the kid everyone's talking about. Jordan nodded. And you're the lawyer Langston tried to destroy. Marissa's jaw tightened. That was years ago. Jordan tilted his head. Still hurts, though, doesn't it? She didn't answer, but the flicker of anger in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. I'm going after him, Jordan said, his voice steady. But I can't do it alone. Marissa raised an eyebrow. You? A 16-year-old, taking on Robert Langston? Do you even know what you're up against? Jordan leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. I already beat one of his guys in court, and I have proof that Langston's running a criminal operation. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. What kind of proof? Jordan pulled out the flash drive Langston had sent him and slid it across the table. Marissa plugged it into her laptop, her expression growing darker as she watched the video of Judge Preston taking money from Langston. When the video ended, she exhaled slowly. "This is big," she said. "But it's not enough. Langston's got layers of protection. You're going to need more than a single video to take him down." Jordan nodded. "That's why I need your help." Marissa studied him for a long moment, then finally smiled. A small, bitter smile. "You're either the bravest kid I've ever met," she said, "or the dumbest." Jordan smirked. "Maybe both." Marissa introduced Jordan to Wes, a tech expert with a knack for hacking. Wes was in his mid-20s, with messy hair and a hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He sat in a dimly lit room filled with monitors, his fingers flying over a keyboard as lines of code scrolled across the screens. "So," Wes said, not looking up, "you're the kid who's going to take down Langston." Jordan shrugged. "With your help." Wes chuckled. "You realize how illegal this is, right?" Jordan smirked. "Only if we get caught." Wes finally looked up, a grin spreading across his face. "I like you, kid." Over the next few hours, Wes explained how he could access Langston's private servers. "The problem," he said, "is that Langston's security is top-notch. Firewalls, encryption, the works. But if we can get physical access to his server room, I can bypass all of it." Jordan frowned. "Physical access? As in, breaking into his law firm?" Wes nodded. "Exactly." Marissa groaned. "I can't believe I'm letting a kid rope me into this." Jordan grinned. Too late now. The team spent the next 2 days planning the heist. Langston's law firm was a fortress with security cameras, guards, and motion sensors covering every inch of the building. But Jordan had done his homework. He'd studied the building's blueprints, memorized the guard schedules, and identified a weak spot: an old maintenance door on the side of the building that wasn't connected to the main security system. "We go in through here," Jordan said, pointing to the blueprint spread out on Marissa's desk. "Wes, you'll need to disable the cameras in the stairwell. Marissa and I will keep watch while you hack into the servers." Wes nodded. "Once I'm in, I can download everything: emails, financial records, case files. If Langston's dirty, it'll be in there." Marissa crossed her arms. "And what happens if we get caught?" Jordan met her gaze. "We don't." The team needed one more ally. Someone who had worked for Langston and knew the inner workings of his operation. Marissa reached out to a former Langston employee, a woman named Rachel who had been fired after refusing to falsify evidence in a case. Rachel was hesitant at first. "If Langston finds out I'm helping you," she said, "I'm dead." Jordan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "If we don't stop him, more people will get hurt. You have a chance to make things right." Rachel hesitated, then finally nodded. "What do you need?" "Information," Jordan said. "Everything you know about Langston's operation, his clients, his connections, his secrets." Rachel exhaled slowly. "All right, but if this goes south, I was never here." The night before the heist, Jordan sat alone in his apartment, staring at the blueprint of Langston's law firm. His mind raced with possibilities. What could go wrong? What they'd do if they were caught? What they'd find in Langston's servers? His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marissa. "You ready for this?" Jordan typed back. As ready as I'll ever be. He knew the risks. Breaking into Langston's law firm was dangerous, maybe even suicidal. But he also knew he didn't have a choice. Langston was too powerful, too corrupt. If Jordan didn't stop him, no one would. He grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. The team was meeting at Marissa's office for one final briefing before the heist. As he walked through the dark, empty streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the calm before the storm. When Jordan arrived at Marissa's office, the team was already there. Marissa stood by the whiteboard, her arms crossed, while Wes sat at the table, typing furiously on his laptop. Rachel was pacing nervously, her arms wrapped around herself. Jordan walked in, and everyone turned to look at him. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is it. Tomorrow night, we take down Langston. We all know the risks, but we also know what's at stake. If we pull this off, we can expose him for what he really is, a criminal who's been hiding behind a suit and a smile." Marissa nodded. "We're with you, kid." Wes grinned. "Let's do this." Rachel hesitated, then finally said, "Let's make him pay." Jordan looked at each of them, feeling a surge of determination. They were an unlikely team: a 16-year-old prodigy, a disgraced attorney, a hacker, and a whistleblower, but they were all he had. And they were enough. The night was dark, the air thick with tension as Jordan, Marissa, and Wes stood in the shadows outside Langston's law firm. The building loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like a fortress of power and corruption. Jordan's heart pounded, but his face remained calm. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. Wes adjusted the small backpack slung over his shoulder, his fingers twitching nervously. "You sure about this?" he whispered. Jordan nodded. "We don't have a choice." Marissa, dressed in all black, checked her watch. "Security shift change is in 5 minutes. That's our window." The team moved quickly, sticking to the shadows as they approached the side of the building. Jordan had identified an old maintenance door that wasn't connected to the main security system. It was their way in. Wes pulled out a small device and attached it to the door's electronic lock. The screen on the device lit up, and Wes's fingers flew over the keypad. A few seconds later, the lock clicked open. "Piece of cake," Wes muttered, grinning. Jordan pushed the door open slowly, wincing as it creaked. The three of them slipped inside, the dim glow of emergency lights guiding their way. The maintenance stairwell was narrow and smelled of dust and mildew. Jordan led the way, his footsteps silent on the concrete steps. Marissa followed close behind, her eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Wes brought up the rear, his laptop already open as he prepared to disable the security cameras. "Cameras are down," Wes whispered, his voice barely audible. "But we've got about 10 minutes before someone notices." Jordan nodded. "Let's move." They climbed the stairs quickly, their breaths coming in short, quiet bursts. The server room was on the top floor, and every second counted. When they reached the top, Jordan peered through the small window in the stairwell door. The hallway was empty, the only sound the faint hum of the building's HVAC system. "Clear," Jordan whispered. They slipped into the hallway, moving quickly but quietly toward the server room. Wes pulled out another device and attached it to the door's keypad. The screen lit up, and Wes began typing furiously. "Almost there," Wes muttered. Just a few more seconds, the door clicked open. The server room was a maze of blinking lights and humming machines. Rows of servers lined the walls, their cooling fans creating a low, constant drone. Wes immediately went to work, plugging his laptop into one of the servers. "I just need 60 seconds, Wes said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Once I'm in, I can download everything." Jordan and Marissa stood guard by the door, their eyes darting to the hallway outside. The tension was palpable, every second feeling like an eternity. "Come on, Wes," Marissa whispered. "Hurry up." Wes's screen lit up with lines of code. "I'm in," he said, his voice tense but excited. "Downloading now." Jordan glanced at the progress bar on Wes's screen. 10%. 20%. 30%. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Jordan's heart skipped a beat. "Someone's coming." Marissa peeked through the crack in the door. "2 guards," she whispered. "They're heading this way." Jordan's mind raced. They couldn't afford to be caught now. "Wes, how much longer?" "Almost there," Wes said, his voice tight. Just a few more seconds. The footsteps grew louder. Marissa grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and handed it to Jordan. "Be ready." Jordan nodded, gripping the extinguisher tightly. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. The door handle turned. The door swung open, and the 2 guards stepped inside. They froze when they saw Jordan and Marissa. What the one of them started to say, but Jordan didn't give him a chance. He swung the fire extinguisher, hitting the first guard in the chest and sending him stumbling backward. The second guard reached for his radio, but Marissa was faster. She grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, slamming him against the wall. "Don't move," she hissed. The first guard recovered quickly, lunging at Jordan. Jordan ducked, swinging the extinguisher again and catching the guard in the side. The guard grunted in pain but kept coming, grabbing Jordan by the shoulders and slamming him against a server rack. Jordan's vision blurred, but he fought back, kicking the guard in the stomach and breaking free. He swung the extinguisher one more time, and the guard crumpled to the floor. "Done," Wes shouted, yanking the flash drive out of the server. "Let's go." Marissa knocked the second guard out with a well-placed punch, and the 3 of them bolted for the door. They sprinted down the hallway, their footsteps echoing loudly. Behind them, alarms began to blare, and the sound of shouting filled the air. "Move," Jordan shouted, leading the way back to the stairwell. They burst through the door and started down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Wes stumbled, nearly dropping his laptop, but Jordan grabbed his arm and pulled him along. "Keep moving." Jordan urged. They reached the second floor, then the first. Just a little further, the door above them burst open, and guards poured into the stairwell. "Stop," one of them shouted. Jordan didn't look back. He shoved through the emergency exit door, and the three of them spilled out into the alley behind the building. A black SUV screeched to a stop in front of them. The driver's side window rolled down, and Judge Preston's face appeared. "Get in," he shouted. No hesitation. They jumped into the SUV, tires screeching as Preston hit the gas. Bullets shattered the back windshield, but they were already speeding away. They didn't stop until they were miles away from Langston's law firm. Preston parked in a deserted alley, breathing hard. "Everyone okay?" he asked, his voice tense. Jordan nodded, his heart still racing. "We're fine." Wes held up the flash drive, a grin spreading across his face. "We got it." Marissa let out a shaky breath. That was too close. Jordan leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. They had the evidence, but he knew this wasn't over. Langston would come after them with everything he had. But for now, they had what they needed. "Let's end this," Jordan said, his voice steady. The flash drive in Jordan's hand felt like a ticking time bomb. It held everything: emails, financial records, witness statements, all the evidence they needed to bring down Robert Langston. But Jordan knew the hardest part was still ahead. They had to present the evidence in a way that would stick, and they had to do it before Langston could silence them for good. The next morning, Jordan sat across from U.S. District Attorney Samuel Grayson, one of the few officials Langston didn't control. Grayson's office was sleek and modern, but the man himself looked tired, his eyes heavy with the weight of his job. Jordan slid the flash drive across the desk. "This is everything," he said. "Emails, financial records, witness statements. It's all there." Grayson picked up the flash drive, his expression skeptical. "You're just a kid," he said, his voice flat. "What makes you think you can take down Robert Langston?" Jordan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because I already have." Grayson studied him for a long moment, then plugged the flash drive into his computer. As he scrolled through the files, his expression shifted from skepticism to disbelief, then to anger. "This is massive," Grayson said, his voice low. "Conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. If this is real, it's enough to put Langston away for life." Jordan nodded. "It's real." Grayson exhaled sharply, then picked up his phone. "Give me a warrant," he said into the receiver. 2 hours later, the FBI stormed Langston's law firm. Agents poured into the building, seizing files, confiscating computers, and arresting anyone who resisted. The scene was chaos: flashing lights, shouting agents, and the sound of glass breaking as doors were kicked in. Jordan watched from a distance, his heart pounding. This was it. The moment they'd been working toward. Then, Langston emerged from the building, flanked by FBI agents. His once impeccable suit was rumpled, his face pale with shock. The cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, but Langston didn't answer. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, as he was led to a waiting car. For the first time, the smirk was gone. 3 days later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed: reporters, lawyers, spectators, all eager to see the fall of Robert Langston. Jordan sat at the prosecutor's table, his heart racing but his face calm. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was an attorney, and he was ready. Langston sat at the defense table, his expression unreadable. His lawyer, a high-priced attorney with a reputation for winning impossible cases, looked confident, but Jordan knew better. They had the evidence. They had the truth. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. "All rise," the bailiff said. Jordan stood, his hands steady as he buttoned his suit jacket. This was it. The moment of truth. The prosecutor stood, his voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a simple case. The defendant, Robert Langston, is a criminal. He has used his power, his influence, and his wealth to manipulate the legal system for his own gain. But today that ends." He gestured toward Jordan. "This young man, Jordan Hayes, risked everything to bring the truth to light. And the evidence you're about to see will leave no doubt that Robert Langston is guilty of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice." The jury listened intently, their eyes flickering between the prosecutor and Langston. Langston's lawyer stood, his voice smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is built on lies. The prosecution has presented no credible evidence, only the wild accusations of a child who doesn't understand the law. I urge you to see this for what it is: a desperate attempt to destroy a man who has dedicated his life to justice." Jordan clenched his fists under the table. They were trying to discredit him, but he wasn't going to let them. The prosecution began presenting its case. West took the stand, explaining how he had hacked into Langston's servers and retrieved the evidence. The jury listened in stunned silence as he described the emails, the financial records, the witness statements, all of it pointing to Langston's guilt. Then, Marissa took the stand. She spoke about her own experiences with Langston, how he had tried to destroy her career when she refused to play by his rules. Her testimony was powerful, her voice shaking with emotion as she described the toll it had taken on her life. Finally, Jordan took the stand. He spoke calmly, confidently, laying out the case against Langston piece by piece. He explained how he had gathered the evidence, how he had risked everything to bring the truth to light. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for hours. Jordan sat at the prosecutor's table, his heart pounding as he waited for the verdict. Langston sat across the room, his expression unreadable. Finally, the jury returned. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. The foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." The room held its breath. "On the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty." Gasps filled the room. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty." Langston's face went pale. "On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions, spectators cheered, and Langston's lawyer slumped in his chair. Jordan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had done it. They had won. Langston was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Jordan stood and watched. For the first time, he felt a sense of peace. The weight that had been pressing down on him for so long was gone. Judge Preston walked up beside him, a small smile on his face. "You did it, kid," he said. "You actually did it." Jordan nodded. "We did it." Preston chuckled. "No, Jordan. You did it. You're going to be dangerous one day." Jordan smiled. "I already am." The city buzzed with the news of Robert Langston's conviction. Headlines screamed, "Teen prodigy takes down corrupt attorney," and "Justice served. Langston sentenced to life." Jordan Hayes, the 16-year-old legal prodigy, had become a national sensation overnight. But for Jordan, the victory felt bittersweet. The fight had cost him everything: his anonymity, his safety, and his trust in the system. Yet, as he stood outside the courthouse, breathing in the cool night air, he knew one thing for certain. He had changed the game. And the game would never be the same. In the weeks that followed, Jordan's life became a whirlwind. Reporters camped outside his apartment, begging for interviews. Law schools offered him scholarships, and prestigious firms dangled lucrative job offers. But Jordan turned them all down. He wasn't interested in fame or fortune. He wanted something deeper, something real. One evening, as he sat in his tiny apartment surrounded by stacks of law books, there was a knock at the door. Jordan frowned. No one ever visited him unannounced. Cautiously, he opened the door to find Judge Preston standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mind if I come in?" Preston asked. Jordan stepped aside, letting the judge in. Preston looked around the cramped apartment, his eyes lingering on the piles of books and legal notes. "You've done well, Jordan," Preston said, his voice quiet but sincere. "Better than anyone expected." Jordan shrugged. "I just did what I had to do." Preston nodded, then sighed. "I owe you an apology." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For underestimating you," Preston said. "For thinking you were just a kid who didn't know what he was getting into. You proved me wrong, and I'm glad you did." Jordan didn't respond. He wasn't sure what to say. Preston reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Jordan. Jordan opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. It was a recommendation, signed by Preston, endorsing Jordan for a position at a prestigious law firm. "I know you've turned down offers before," Preston said, "but this one's different. It's not just a job, it's a chance to make a real difference." Jordan looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Why are you doing this?" Preston smiled, a small, tired smile. "Because you're the future, Jordan, and the future needs people like you." The next morning, Jordan found himself sitting across from Robert Langston's former rival, a man named Daniel Carter. Carter was the head of a nonprofit legal organization dedicated to fighting corruption and defending the underprivileged. His office was modest, a stark contrast to Langston's opulent law firm, but it felt genuine. "I've been following your case," Carter said, his voice warm but firm. What you did, taking down Langston, it was extraordinary. But I think you're capable of even more. Jordan leaned forward, his interest piqued. What do you mean? Carter smiled. I want you to join us. Not as an intern or a junior associate, but as a full-fledged attorney. You'll have the resources, the support, and the freedom to take on the cases that matter. No red tape, no politics, just justice. Jordan's heart raced. This was what he'd been waiting for, a chance to make a real difference. But he hesitated. I'm only 16, he said. I don't have a degree, let alone a law license. Carter chuckled. You think that matters? You've already proven yourself in the courtroom. The rest is just paperwork. We'll handle that. Jordan sat back, his mind racing. This was it, the opportunity he'd been dreaming of. But it came with risks. Taking on corrupt systems, powerful enemies. It was dangerous work. Carter seemed to read his thoughts. I won't sugarcoat it, he said. This won't be easy. You'll face challenges, threats, maybe even danger. But if anyone can handle it, it's you. Jordan took a deep breath, then nodded. I'm in. Jordan's first case with Carter's organization was a class action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company accused of covering up the side effects of a popular drug. The case was complex, with mountains of evidence and a team of high-powered lawyers on the other side. But Jordan thrived under the pressure. He spent weeks poring over documents, interviewing witnesses, and preparing arguments. When the day of the trial arrived, Jordan stood in the courtroom, his heart pounding but his mind clear. The opposing attorney, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for crushing his opponents, smirked as Jordan approached the stand. This should be interesting, he muttered. But Jordan didn't flinch. He presented his case with precision and passion, dismantling the defense's arguments piece by piece. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear. The pharmaceutical company was guilty. The victory was a turning point, not just for Jordan, but for the countless people who had been harmed by the company's negligence. As Jordan walked out of the courthouse that day, he felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for others. And he knew this was just the beginning. That evening, he sat in his apartment, staring at the city lights through his window. His phone buzzed, a text from Marissa. You did good, kid. Proud of you. Jordan smiled. He had come a long way from the scared, lonely boy who had defended himself in court. He had faced down one of the most powerful men in the country, exposed corruption, and won. But he knew the fight wasn't over. There were more Langstons out there, more systems to challenge, more people to help. And he was ready. A few days later, Jordan found himself standing outside the courthouse once again. Judge Preston walked up beside him, his hands in his pockets. You've come a long way, Preston said, his voice tinged with pride. Jordan nodded. Thanks to you. Preston chuckled. Don't give me too much credit. You did the hard part. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. So, Preston said, what's next? Jordan smiled. I don't know. But whatever it is, I'll be ready. Preston nodded, then clapped Jordan on the shoulder. I have no doubt. As Preston walked away, Jordan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the future on his shoulders. It wasn't a burden, it was a promise. A promise to fight for justice, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, and to never back down. The city lights glowed brighter than ever, and for the first time, Jordan felt like he belonged.